Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. I'm your host, Scotty, and I'm here with my co-host, Saur. Before we get into this episode, let's start with this. My friend, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling fine. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling ready for the holidays. I've been dreading this specific episode because I know what's forthcoming and I want it to end as soon as possible. But I think it's an important conversation to be had. It's a conversation that puts things in perspective, gives context for a lot of things. And as you have probably read by the title, we are going to talk about the 2025 season and how we feel about Javier Mascherano. Now, how are you feeling today?
I am I'm interested in how I'm feeling because I don't think this is going to be an overly positive episode.
Yeah.
And I want to just say that from the top. And so if you are not interested in a conversation sort of identifying some of Javier Mascherano's weaknesses this year and talking about some of the worst moments of the season or some of the failures of the season, maybe this episode's not for you, and I'll just put that out from the top because we're going to talk about Javier Mascherano in its whole. I'm sorry, his season as a whole. We're going to talk about the season, whether Inter Miami had success as a whole, and some bigger picture conversations that we went back and looked at the entire season in order to evaluate. So if that's not what you're interested in and you want to, think about the 4 games that we won the MLS Cup with, I
Ride
totally
high
get
on
it.
the vibes. Yeah.
I totally get it. And we'll see you next time. If you, want to be a part of this conversation, welcome, and we're glad to have you. But basically, almost the entire season, we decided we're going to wait to have a conversation about Javier Mascherano at the end to determine how we felt about it in its entirety. And then, listen, the season kept going because Inter Miami kept winning in the playoffs and eventually won the MLS Cup. And I do think that's a feather in the cap, but also doesn't erase everything. And so we're gonna talk about some of our concerns from him earlier in the season and how he responded to some of them and where he deserves credit, and then also where maybe just the way the schedule laid out or the team hit form or whatever maybe covered up some of the weaknesses that we're not actually necessarily super confident in Mascherano moving forward. But we'll talk about all of that. And that's sort of the plan. And then we can kind of evaluate that within the bigger picture of the Lionel Messi project or the Inter Miami project with Lionel Messi after we kind of discuss everything, because I think it will all kind of go together pretty well. Any questions?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. Let's get straight into it.
Okay, let's start with a recap of the season. I just want to set the ground baseline for what happened this year because, again, it is so easy to think about the MLS Cup as representative of what Inter Miami did this year. But there was actually a lot of things that happened this season, and we were there for all of it, and so we don't want to leave anything out. They came into this season, new coach, new system, Lionel Messi and Javier Mascherano, Luis Suarez, the guys returned, and they kind of got off to an electric start. In their first 9 games, they won 8 of them. The only draw because they got a first half red card that put them down a man, and they still found a way to get a draw. Actually, they also got a first half red card in another game and found a way to win. So the first 9 games of the season were electric. We were talking about how this team didn't know how to lose. We had a game winner against Atlanta in the 89th minute because of Fafa Picault. Like it was electric. And then we got our first taste of defeat in the CONCACAF Champions Cup quarterfinals. We played LAFC. They beat us 1-0 in LA, and it was easy to think that was an aberration, but it really was the start of a negative trend, and you kind of had the worst period of the season of results. They had a 7-game stretch where they lost 5, drew 1, and won 1, which is really crazy when you think about it. And interspersed, there was a huge moment, right? They beat LAFC in the second leg, and that was fun. But after that, 7 games, 5 losses, and it was as bad as it got. And everything turned in the 86th minute against Philadelphia when Lionel Messi steps up to a free kick, nails it, and they're still down 3-2 But then Telasco Segovia hits a game saver in stoppage time to make it 3-3. And that draw against Philadelphia, who was top of the East at that time and would eventually win the Supporters Shield, I think really changed the momentum for this team. They end up winning their next couple games heading into the Club World Cup. I think we all, even though the draws and losses aren't particularly impressive in the Club World Cup, the performances were great. They absolutely hit, matched, exceeded expectations. Gets the huge win over Porto, but I think we all came away from the Al-Ali and the Palmeiras game feeling really good about the team and being really proud of what they did. They leave the Club World Cup, and the schedule does get a little bit easier in the MLS. Get a couple of results, and then they play Cincinnati twice in a 2-week span, lose at Cincinnati 3-0, and then were the worst team at home. They get a 0-0 draw. And I do think that was also a turning point in the season where they started to play more aggressive and less conservative, and I think it really worked for them. They head into the Leagues Cup. Rocco does his thing for the first couple games. They get out of the phase one of the Leagues Cup, which, remember, is much more difficult this year than it had been in years past. Go into the Leagues Cup playoffs round, knockout round. They get a win over Tigres because of a couple penalties. They get the comeback win against Orlando City because of the red card. And then they go to Seattle and have a terrible final that I think none of us want to remember for what happened on or off the field. But then they settled down, finished the season strong. A little bit of a light schedule, I think, helped build some momentum, build some confidence into the team. And then they make the change at goalkeeper, and it's basically smooth sailing from there. 4-1 win over the Revolution, 4-0 against Atlanta, 5-2 against Nashville. They played Nashville 3 times in a row, entering the playoffs, 3-1, that 2-1 loss in Game 2. But then the final 4 games of the season, as wonderful as we've seen as Inter Miami fans, just smash Nashville in Game 3, 4-0, smash Cincinnati on the road in the Eastern Conference semifinals, 4-0. Took care of NYCFC in the conference finals, 5-1. And then the Vancouver final, back and forth for a while, but Inter Miami ultimately makes the key plays that help them win that game, and we finished the season on an absolute high note. Did I miss anything?
I think you can take a bit of a breath. You've done phenomenal recapping the whole season in 5 minutes. It's very interesting. As you were talking through it, I was just reliving some of our conversations that we were having on the podcast, the chats that we would get. I still remember when we were playing those first 8 games when Miami was winning every single one of them, drew one against NYC, but the vibes weren't always perfect. Inter Miami was winning, but I still remember against Cavalier, everyone could see there were holes in the game. We won the game, but there were issues. Everyone could see that Inter Miami is not creating as many chances. We were playing very defensive. And at the time, we thought maybe that's how Javier Mascherano wants to set up. And I think that was his initial plan. So the first 8 games weren't perfect, and the writing was probably on the wall as soon as we played that LAFC game. Somehow we came out of it winning. But then after that, it was just an absolute fall off the cliff. And the vibes were very low at some very crucial junctures in this season. I don't know how many people actually remember that because of how high we finished. But there were instances where I did not want to come on the pregame show just because it was it was bad. We had to watch Gonzalo Lujan play football. We had to watch Inter Miami be defensive for 90 minutes, not being the better team. And it was difficult to watch Inter Miami for large parts of the season. Now, I will say it might be accurate for some people to suggest it's not how you start, but how you finish. So in that vein, the fact that we were actually able to finish on a really high note was good. But I think this contextualization is important, that this season, even though it finished with the best result possible, had a lot of missed opportunities, had a lot of frustrations, and wasn't always the high vibe that we have gotten used to over the last couple of months. It was a roller coaster, to say the least.
It was a roller coaster. Let's talk about Javier Mascherano, because we will have plenty of time to break down the most fun moments and all that stuff, and we will have done that, and we'll do that, continue to do that. But like specifically talking about Javier Mascherano, I wanted to set the stage because it was a back and forth season, but it did feel at the time like, man, we're doing what we are supposed to do until we meet someone that's actually good enough to punish us for not doing the things we're supposed to be doing. And then we would get beat up. So I went back because you and I both said they should fire Javier Mascherano. And it was after the 3-0 Orlando City loss. We had talked about some of the inefficiencies or deficiencies of the team heading into the Vancouver series, and we said, okay, listen, you lost, you got the wake-up call, you get the statement that you have to rebound from, and go for the next 4 games and prove it. And it just got worse. And it culminated in a 3-0 loss to Orlando City that, I re-listened to this podcast. We felt that Orlando City probably had 2, maybe 3 really poor misses that could have turned this game into 5-6-0.
An absolute rout, yeah.
And it was like, and I say that to say, the scoreline flattered us at 3-0 in those games, and so we said Javier Mascherano should be fired, and we talked about how the thing they will need is a major change to the structure and setup of this team. Now, one of the things that did happen is Lionel Messi did respond more so than I think Javier Mascherano. Another thing is, instead of moving and changing coaches, they went out and brought in another superstar in the summer in Rodrigo de Paul, which did impact the overall level talent on this team. But what we did in that episode was we talked about some of the things specifically that we were concerned about with Javier Mascherano. Not just, oh, he's not getting the results we want, but why, and we tried to dive into some of the perceived weaknesses we had from him. So I figured we could revisit some of those, kind of talk about if we feel like he's grown, if we feel like we're comfortable where he's at now, or if we still have real concerns about it. And that maybe will help us evaluate exactly how we feel about Javier Mascherano now, because I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment of we had a great playoff run and we won the MLS Cup, and that just erases everything that happened beforehand, because I don't think that's the case. And I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we just assumed everything is great now, because they did kill it. They crushed it in the playoffs. So I'll just kind of say some of the concerns we had then, and we can just kind of have a conversation on if they're better. We talked about how Javier Mascherano did not understand the project at Inter Miami. And what we meant by that was he came in and he wanted to be very conservative. And they instituted this very low 4-4-2, very conservative, very structured and disciplined 4-4-2 that helped them, or the goal was to be more defensively sound on a team that all their superstar players are attacking, goal-scoring threats, right? Jordi Alba, an attacking left back. Luis Suarez, Lionel Messi, who, remember, coming off of 2024, was the MVP and the number 2 in the Golden Boot race. Like, these were 2 of the best players in the league in your attack. And it felt like we were playing too defensive, too low, too much in our own half, and asking our forward players to do a ton of work in the opposition half to create good chances. And they were getting some results because it's Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez and Jordi Alba, but it never felt sustainable. And when you went up against some of the best teams, they just got completely shut out. So it just felt like it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are supposed to be under with Lionel Messi on the team. And I think we improved this year in that regard.
He came in with a mindset of how he wants to play and how he would like this team to play. And of course, he was a defender in his time, sometimes a midfielder, but mostly a defender. And you could see that the philosophy that he was trying to impose on this team was one of a defensively solid, low block team that absorbs the pressure, that doesn't concede too many goals, and is able to shut teams out to win games. I think for some games it worked because Inter Miami's talent is supreme. It is beyond anything that the MLS has seen. And our talent carried us forward in those games. But you nailed it. Every time we went against an opposition that was equal or maybe better than us in talent, we got completely decimated. We weren't able to use that strategy. We weren't able to be defensive. This Inter Miami team was not built to be a defensive juggernaut. And that's, I think, what Javier Mascherano wanted to do with this team. There's no surprise that our highest successes this entire season came when Inter Miami took the game to the opposition. When they went toe to toe, when they overwhelmed the opposition with attack, and they weren't concerned about conceding too many goals because they would outscore the opposition. Much like the Tata Martino philosophy that we saw last season. So the fact that we eventually got to that point, I think that's a credit plus mark in Javi Mascherano's column. But why did it take that long? Why did we start off with a philosophy that was anti what this team is built on? You can't have players like Luis Suarez, Lionel Messi, eventually Rodrigo de Paul, Sergio Busquets. The players that you bring in, like Baltazar Rodriguez, Telasco Segovia, Tadeo Allende, they're also attacking players first. So why did we start off the season with a back foot sort of a mentality? And it was never going to work. And you said it right. It's unsustainable to assume that this team would be able to do that over the course of the entire season. And some of our biggest losses actually came when Javi Mascherano tried to be defensive and in a low block.
It just popped in my head as you were saying that. During the playoffs, one of the things that was true about this Inter Miami team is they were great in the final 15 minutes of games, where they would get a lead, but then they would turn that lead into a blowout in the final 15, 20 minutes of a game. And do you remember in the beginning of the season where he would get a 1-0 lead and then just low block
Bunker
it
down,
for the
yeah.
entire second half?
Yeah.
And so even our wins were 1-goal wins because we were just trying to survive with a goal lead. And we were yelling from the rafters, no, you got to be more aggressive. And here we are at the end of the season, and you see in the playoffs especially, you get that 1 or 2 goal lead and the other team starts to move forward a little bit, and then you can just blow it open. I think he deserves credit. And I mentioned it when I was running down the season, that Cincinnati duet where they kind of got beat up by a better team twice. Because I think that's where this really came from, was when he was playing better teams, he thought we should be more defensive. And the answer was actually to push the pedal to the metal and really go out and try and dominate them, because you do have Lionel Messi and all of these great players. So for a young coach, I thought there was some really frustrating mistakes, philosophical mistakes, not makes the wrong substitution or picks the wrong play, but like philosophical mistakes I thought were crazy that was allowed to happen in the first place. But I do want to give him credit, because I do think they did get a lot better as the season went on. Especially the last third of the season, the number of goals per game really goes up. The number of goals allowed per game goes down a little bit. They became a better defensive team, despite the fact that they were playing more aggressively and scoring more goals. They actually were conceding fewer, both in terms of actual goals allowed and also just expected goals allowed, how many shots they were giving up and the quality of those shots. It all improved. So,
and you know what else was also happening in that time?
Good.
The players were enjoying themselves and everyone seemed to be playing in form.
Yes. It's another great point, because early on in the season, they weren't creating a ton of offense, and you found yourself with Lionel Messi in bad form. And that was the worst we've seen of Lionel Messi at Inter Miami during that maybe 10-game stretch where Inter Miami wasn't getting a ton of results. Luis Suarez never got his foothold in this season. Jordi Alba, the first 2/3 of the season, was not as effective of a player. So I think that's an excellent point. When you started to play more aggressively, all your players started having more fun. They started getting into better form, and you were able to sort of get the results to follow because the process was good, not hoping to get results with flawed process, which was the case early on in the season.
Now, here's my counterpoint, and maybe we can end this particular talking point on that. Would you blame Javier Mascherano for this, or would you blame the front office? Or not blame, but when you hire a coach like Javier Mascherano, who's so young, who's so inexperienced, who's just starting off his coaching career, I think it would be naive to suggest that there would not be any growing pains and there's not going to be any teething issues. Perhaps what we saw in the first third of the season, halfway through the season was exactly that, a young coach who is still trying to get his footing, who's still trying to learn, who's trying to gain the experience. And the fact that he was able to make the changes and improve speaks to his adaptability and is actually a credit to him. So maybe we should give him some grace. And when you hire a coach that's fairly young, I think these things are bound to happen, right? That's an
I, I,
argument that some people would make.
I I'm not gonna give him a pass on this because I think absolutely growing pains for a young coach. That looks like, when do I make the right substitution? When do I press the substitution button? Who do I want to bring off my bench to impact games? What style of player belongs on the field? Like, I think there are things that young coaches will improve on over time, but I think the entire philosophy being wrong was a Javier Mascherano error, and I think that speaks to just like his ability to understand where this game should be going. And I don't think that was representative of what the ownership wanted at all. Like, they have always talked about being an aggressive, high-scoring team. Like, that was clearly Javier Mascherano's brainchild that he was trying to enact. And I want to give him some credit for moving off of it, but that was all on him. It wasn't his job to come in and make the team better defensively. It wasn't his job to stifle our creativity. It was his job to maximize what this team could be, and he felt that was the way to do it, and he was wrong about that. But the team evolved, and so like I want to give him some credit for not staying with it till
Capitulating.
death. Yeah, yeah.
And I think maybe this is a good segue when we talk about what does a young coach bring and whether his philosophy can be adapted or whatever. But if you allow me, the next talking point that I want to discuss is personnel ID, because maybe that's something that is not really taught. That's something that comes across from within. And no matter how young of a coach you are, no matter how inexperienced you are, your personnel ID is something that I think you come into the game with to
Well,
understand which players are good, which players fit your system.
especially if you think about Javier Mascherano's history, right? He's been watching film on great players for the last 25 years,
Yeah.
20 years. And beyond that, he was a youth national team coach where his entire job was to watch film and evaluate
Identify
talents.
youth. Yeah.
So yes, player ID. This is something that we were very concerned with for much of the season. And I am still concerned with it. I just want to put it out there. He did not seem to understand which players on his team were better than others, even when it was, I think, fairly obvious to the rest of us. And he rode with those players for so long that it cost Inter Miami trophies and success in 2025. And I'm not entirely convinced he's better at it. And I think when you think of, okay, he was a youth national team coach, all he did was watch film and evaluate players, and then was at the top level and was watching film on all those players, his opposition for years. Like, I don't think has any excuse to not be incredible at evaluating talent. Whereas, listen, if you're a young coach from South Florida trying to make your way, that is a different story. I understand that it could take 10 years of film practice to do that. But Javier Mascherano should have had that already. Just a couple examples. Early on in the season, Chelo Weigant played a lot over Ian Frey. That was seemingly Mascherano's go-to for a while. We saw Federico Redondo start over Yannick Bright in the important games, specifically the Vancouver series and the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinal. We saw Yannick Bright on the bench and Federico Redondo in the starting 11, and we gave up 5 goals over 2 games. Moving forward, Gonzalo Lujan started a ton of games, gave up a ton of goals including in the Leagues Cup final. I think the killer goal against Seattle came in that first half. Listen, I know we lost that game 3-0, but the last 2 goals came after Inter Miami was really pushing forward after the 80th minute, and there was just holes in behind. The goal that was the killer is the one that was entirely Gonzalo Lujan's fault towards the end of the first half. Talking about Rocco Rios Novo versus Oscar Ustari, or even better yet, Drake Callender versus Oscar Ustari early in the season. Those were, I think, decisions that were really poor and cost Inter Miami, whether it's the CONCACAF Champions Cup, whether it's the Supporters Shield, whether it's the Leagues Cup. Like, these were personnel evaluations that were both wrong and cost Inter Miami trophies in 2025. He got some of them right eventually. He eventually benches Gonzalo Lujan and commits to a Noah Allen and Maxi Falcone partnership in the back. It wasn't until after he had already lost the Leagues Cup. It wasn't until after he had already cost us some real games. He eventually gets the Ian Frey, Chelo Weigant decision right. He eventually gets the goalkeeping situation right. I am very afraid to give him credit for that because he got it wrong for 90% of the season. I think even if you look at the MLS Cup final roster, starting 11, I'm not sure he got every decision right. And so the ones I just mentioned, we were proven right and he was proven wrong over time because even he realized I can't continue with this. But I think even in the playoff run, you see some decisions that are maybe not playing your best players. And so I don't want to give him a ton of credit for this. And I still think this is a real concern of mine moving forward, especially as we're going into an offseason where we're going to have to buy 10 new players. Is he going to pick good players? And going into next season when he has position battles, is he going to make the right decisions at the right time so Inter Miami can maximize their success?
I think, to his credit, the players that he brought in were largely very successful at Inter Miami. Maxi Falcone found his rhythm. Baltazar Rodriguez had some really good moments. Tadeo Allende breaking the record in the playoffs. Matteo Silvetti being a breakout superstar. Now, I don't know how much of that has to do with the front office scouting versus Javier Mascherano finding these players and wanting to play them.
Well,
But then there were also some egregious decisions that he made this season. And I don't think I can ever forgive Javier Mascherano for bringing Gonzalo Lujan to this club. That was the biggest travesty for me. And my fear is that we're going to get another one of those Gonzalo Lujan-esque players in the offseason who we are going to purchase for a lot of money. He's not going to be starting level caliber. They're going to pay him that much money to make him starting level, and then he's going to not perform well. That's my biggest concern. But you're right. The philosophical conundrum here is, are you willing to go through the pain for 90% of the season for the success that we received at the end? And yes, credit to Javi Mascherano for changing things when he did. But was it too late? Because you mentioned exact moments of players costing us certain games. Ustari, Supporter Shield. Gonzalo Lujan, Leagues Cup. Federico Redondo starting in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I don't want to blame him directly. I don't want to blame these players directly. It's always a team game. But personnel decisions do matter. And when for that 90% of the season, you drop the Leagues Cup final, you mess up the CONCACAF Champions Cup semi-final, and then the Supporter Shield also leaves you. This season, if he'd done all these decisions earlier, if he'd had the ability to recognize his mistakes earlier, Inter Miami could be talking about an absolute record-breaking season when it comes to trophies. So I know it's being selfish and greedy, asking for more, but are you willing to go through the pain for 90% of the season to win that MLS Cup towards the end? And if so, then that's perfectly fine. But there's also a school of thought here that's, was he too late in making the changes?
The other thing is, if you're wrong for 90% of the season, you have to be lucky that you have the right answer available, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about the goalkeeping situation. He makes that change with 2 games left in the regular season. He was lucky Rocco was good, right? Rocco could have been not good. And then you would have been in real trouble because you never tried it out. You never, you should have recognized Ustari was not good enough before the summer transfer window closed. Or you should have at least given Rocco a run to see if he was good enough before the summer transfer. Like, he got lucky that the other options were available to him. And again, I'm not sure. Like, I don't think Velasco Segovia should have been on the bench in the MLS Cup final. Like, I think he's a better player than Baltasar Rodriguez, and I think he would have been a better piece in that game and throughout the playoffs. So, like, I still don't think, I feel much better about his player ID. And again, it's one thing to spend 10 games on a player. It's another thing to spend 50 games on a player. And so for me, it was like, I still don't give him positive marks for this on the season.
And
I
the
still
thing
have
is,
deep
this could be a
questions.
problem next season as well.
Yeah.
That's the biggest concern. Does Yannick Bright get minutes? Does Tilaska Segovia get minutes?
Well, and also just who do they bring in, and are they going to
Yeah.
be able to add value to the team? So yeah, I think he cost this team. At the very least, he absolutely cost this team the Supporter Shield with the goalkeeping decisions. And then I think you can make real cases that they could have done better in the MLS, in the Leagues Cup, and in the CONCACAF Champions Cup final if the personnel decisions were a little bit better. So yeah, like I think those are pretty direct responsibility. Like the responsibility falls on the coach for those. Okay. This is just another thing. Maybe we should let's be clear about this. What we're about to say is conjecture. It did feel like there were plenty of times this season where Javier Mascherano did not have a great relationship with his players. Great is the wrong word. That the relationship was a little bit off. There was some miscommunication there. Couple examples. Yannick Bright. Javier Mascherano was asked about Yannick Bright, and he said Yannick Bright can't play 90 minutes. And then the next day they asked Yannick Bright, and Yannick Bright was like, I don't know, of course I can play 90 minutes. There was a moment where Kremaski has an interview where he talks about being played out of position. And then in the very next game, he gets played in his normal position, his right position. And that to me represented like the front office, or rather the coaching staff thinking, okay, maybe he has a good point. And you kind of wonder, you don't love that it's going on in the media, but if the response is, let's see what he's going to do there, then it feels like they felt maybe there is some like credence to what he's saying. And then you wonder, like, why wasn't that a conversation that was happening behind the scenes? Why wasn't there a better handle on communicating what is the expectation for every player, and how the players can be bought into the project behind the scenes? Like, I want to be clear. This is all conjecture, just reading of the tea leaves, but there was enough of these types of moments throughout the season that are unusual and are different than what we've normally seen from Inter Miami over the years, that give off the impression that not everything was hunky-dory between the players and the coaching staff.
In the vein of conjecture and reading the tea leaves, my assumption is that Javier Mascherano is not very good at handling squad players. Players who are not performing, players who might be disgruntled, players who want minutes but are not getting it. I don't think he has the man management skills to alleviate some of those concerns, make them feel part of the entire squad. And I think he may have had a bit of a, I don't want to say falling out, but again, conjecture, but he's had some difficult moments with players who are not performing and are disgruntled. And the sign of a good manager is someone who can keep the entire squad together and sets a vision for everyone and makes everyone understand what their role on the team is. I think he might be good with having the set of small 13, 14 players that he regularly uses. But when it comes to the broader squad players, I'm not sure if he's capable of alleviating some of their concerns and managing them properly. That's my
Well, and
assumption.
the other thing about that, and listen, I will say it again, all conjecture, all reading the tea leaves. We're not in the locker room. We don't know. But that type of thing you're talking about is not something you develop at
Yeah.
age 45 or whatever Mascherano is. Like, that is just a personality that some people have, the ability to bring everyone together. And it's, whatever you want to describe it as, leadership or, an infectious personality or ability to get people to believe in you. Like, that is just something some people have and some people don't as a personality trait. And I don't necessarily think Javier Mascherano has that. Conjecture. But it is obviously a great trait to have if you're going to be a head coach of, 25 full-grown adults trying to compete at the highest level that are all making a lot of money and, have big egos and all that stuff. Like, it is an incredibly helpful trait to have. And I don't know if Javier Mascherano has that.
I would agree.
Okay, back to what we can say for 100% certainty is he does not rotate. very well at all. If you look at the number of minutes that Lionel Messi and Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets and Luis Suarez played this year, it is frighteningly large, especially when you compare it to what the team did in 2024, which was also, I think, almost an equally successful season if you look at the course of events, or at least comparably successful. You didn't have to, you didn't squeeze a ton more out of these players or a ton more success by putting them on the field for significantly more minutes. And I think we kind of got lucky that it didn't result in any real injuries to the star players.
The biggest case in point for this is Tadeo Allende, who had to suffer for so long, and all of us were calling for him to be replaced, but he continued to be run into the ground.
I
And
don't think he's the guy that I'm really thinking about here. I think it is the star players to start off with, because do you get more out of them by giving them a little bit more rest? I will forever think part of the reason Jordi Alba's retiring is because he kind of maxed out what he was physically able to do this year and maybe didn't want to do that again. And then on the flip side, you have a lot of players that aren't getting any minutes or very few minutes, that, going back to our conversations about how does he keep everyone sort of in line, committed, and wants to be part of the project. There's a lot of players on this team that I think did not get enough minutes based on their talent level in 2025. And those minutes were sort of portioned out in a way that I don't know if anyone really thinks was right. And I think he kind of got away with it. And I also want to say, and I apologize for cutting you off. That was rude of me.
no, that's fine.
I also want to say, we stopped thinking about this in the playoffs because they were playing one game a week. But it did not get any better at any point during the season. So just because we weren't actively thinking about it at the very end doesn't mean that he got better at it at any point, really.
And in the playoffs, players would normally bite the bullet just to get any minutes, right? Because they know they're heading towards this one goal, which is to win the trophy. So the team always comes first. But okay, let's start with the superstar players, because the one point would be Messi having played so many minutes. We were very lucky that he didn't get injured at any point during the season. Because if he had the amount of reliance we had on Lionel Messi for 99% of the season was insane. And if he got injured for a long-term period, that would have spelled disaster for this team. Again, we're talking about if this would have happened then, but that was a genuine concern. You have to manage the minutes of some of these veteran players.
You could see how a 2-week injury to Messi, hamstring pull, could have taken them from where they finished in the Supporter Shield table and then getting home field advantage in the playoffs to 3, 5, 6 points lower, not having home field advantage for a single game, and then not winning the MLS Cup, and us talking about this being a total disaster of a season. That could have been the difference in everything we're talking about.
And the same goes for Jordi Alba, same goes for Luis Suarez, same goes for Sergio Busquets. But then I think the one thing that I look at is the number of players he's actually let down. You can't tell me Alan Abondo only deserved to play, I don't even know how many minutes he's played, 500?
Less.
Much
maybe
less than 500 minutes, Alan Abondo. Yes, he had injury issues. Okay, fair. Credit where, we can't control that. So maybe that was a different concern. But Toto Aviles, Yannick Bright only played 1,400 minutes. Fafa Pico. These are all players who can very much contribute to the success throughout the season, and they should have.
And not just that. Benjamin Kramaski, Robert Taylor, Julian Gressel, right? It was, I think, really a poor showing in how to rotate. And listen, they played 58 games, so it was not like we're playing a small number of games. We can kind of just focus on the MLS and do what we're trying to do. They had the biggest schedule in the history of any MLS club, 58 games. That was always the goal, right? The goal was to be competitive in every single tournament. They didn't play a single game they weren't expecting to play the entire season, other than maybe the round of 16 in the Club World Cup. But
World Cup.
That's one game. They knew from the get-go they wanted to play 58 games.
And you know what we
They
used
wanted
to
to play in the
say?
CONCACAF Champions Cup final too. So
Yeah. They used to say last season, or we used to say, that this is the best assembled squad that MLS has ever seen. We haven't said that this season because we haven't got to see the full squad ever in action, which is sad because I think likes of Fafa Pico, Benjamin Kromaski could definitely have more minutes on this team. And it's unfortunate. I think you mentioned this to me separately, but Javi Mascherano's solution to managing a big squad is to ship the players that he's not able to use away. And that's fine. Some managers do not like to work with big squads. Sometimes it's not conducive, depending on what your schedule is and how many games you're playing. But this Inter Miami team is going to be playing a lot of games, even next season. And you need a big squad for that. But I don't think Javi Marciano is comfortable playing with a big squad. He relies on certain players and he sticks to them.
well, and beyond that, when your front office provides you with a lot of players, you're losing a lot of value by shipping them off, right? We
Yeah.
had to pay to get Julian Gressel off the roster. Benjamin Kromaski and Federico Redondo did not go for as much money as you would have been able to get at other times of their Inter Miami career. And so, they cost themselves value by going that route. And so I think that's another thing that this, and, part of the reason we wanted to do this episode was to talk about how, yes, everything ended really well, but there were some circumstances that led to that. And I think for this specific one, it's just the fact that the playoffs are one game a week that allowed us to not have to think about rotation at all.
Yeah.
But if as soon as you go back to two games, a week, if you go back in time or if you go think forward in time, like that is absolutely a concern of mine. And if you have someone get abducted by aliens for 3 weeks next year and it sinks your whole season, that feels like a totally realistic possibility. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was the losses this season. Inter Miami, when they lost, they lost. They got
bad.
beat up.
Yeah.
If you look at their these are lower losses this season. Obviously, they lost a 2-1 game against Nashville in the playoffs, but aside from that, their losses are 5-3 against Chicago, 3-0 against Charlotte, 3-0 against Seattle, 4-1 against Orlando City, 3-0 against FC Cincinnati, 4-0 against PSG, which understandable, 3-0 against Orlando City, 4-1 against Minnesota, 3-1 against Vancouver, 2-0 against 5-1 on aggregate against Vancouver. And so one of the things we saw this year is that when things didn't go right, they fell off a cliff and there was no ability to stop the bleeding and try and get yourself back in the game. There was not one goal losses. They were thrashings. Almost every time this team lost, it was because they kind of got beat up. And to not put too much on Javier Mascherano for giving him credit or blame for every individual result. Like I think the way the team responds to going down and having the solutions to kind of stop the bleeding and get yourself back in the game is at least partially the coach to kind of get the guys going in the right direction and make the personnel change or two that can reshape the midfield or reinforce your defense so that you can give yourself a chance to compete in every game. There was a lot of games this year that were just totally uncompetitive.
Yeah, it's win big, lose big. That was the philosophy by the end of the season. But I'm just glad that when you went into that Vancouver game, there was a moment where it felt like this could get bad. And Inter Miami held their own in that time. So seems like there was some progress made there. But you're absolutely right. When they lost bad, they lost really bad. And maybe that's a mentality thing. Maybe there's just, yeah, we're losing this game. There's no way we're coming back into it. I don't think that's the case because a lot of players have that mentality of coming back, putting in a good show. But the losses were very difficult to swallow in a lot of the games. And yes, some of the opposition was really good, but some of the oppositions weren't that great either. So the fact that we were
Well,
able to win in the playoffs the way that we did was very well, credit to the team for not going down at any point. But yeah.
Well, it actually, if you go through the schedule and you look at our games against the best teams, there's a lot of pretty frustrating performances. Our games against Vancouver, especially early in the season, not great. Orlando City, they beat us up twice, including at home. FC Cincinnati beat us up twice. Seattle, Charlotte, when Charlotte was at its absolute peak. So, one of the frustrations was they can kind of handle business against the teams they're supposed to handle business against, but when they play the teams that are sort of close to them in terms of quality, it really does fall away. And to their credit, like they did figure that out at the end, and they did make a run through the playoffs. Granted, maybe that FC Cincinnati game being the one real shining example in the playoffs where they went up against a team where we were genuinely nervous against and kind of just beat them up. Nashville, I think we expected that. NYCFC, I think we expected that. And then Vancouver, times where that game wasn't going well, and as you mentioned, they did buckle down and survive and then create the opportunities they needed to get the game-winning moments. So, maybe you can give them some credit for improvement over the course of the season. I don't have a problem with that, but it is something that I think we're going to continue to monitor next year, where if it goes bad, it just really falls off a cliff.
And I think a lot of the points in this conversation that we're having are not to criticize Javier Mascherano or give him credit. It's more about what do we need to look out for next season, right? It's important to holistically evaluate what happened this season so that next season we can actually hopefully see some changes when it comes to these things. Now, I think we are going to see a more dynamic style that we finished with. It's going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be the same defensive style that we started last season with. So it's more about how are we going to evolve as a team under Javier Mascherano in the coming season than anything else. And for that, you have to evaluate where we're coming from.
Well, let's be fair. If we were having this conversation after a first round exit, it would not be about what are they going to do
No,
next
it would
year.
not be
It would
about
be
next
about
season.
whether you continue with Javier Mascherano. And so maybe I'll end with this question, and it's maybe not something we have to have an answer to, but just for everyone to kind of think about. If Inter Miami lost Game 3 against Nashville and they left in the first round, it would have been a disaster. I think nobody would call this season a success. No one would call this season anything but an abject failure, and we would all be shocked if Javier Mascherano was not, fired for that. And so just 4 games really change everything. And it's easy to be a prisoner of the moment. It's easy to be super high and excited about the win and the MLS Cup championship, and we are. And so that's why we wanted to wait a little while to have this conversation. And that's why this conversation is no longer about should they fire Javier Mascherano or not. But I still think there are concerns. I don't think everything is
As rosy. Yeah.
Just because it finished in a brilliant way doesn't, I don't think, alleviate all my concerns.
Yeah, here was the quote that I thought of, right? Just because we reached our destination doesn't mean the journey was smooth. Now, we're not telling you how to feel about Javier Mascherano and the team, but if you're willing to live through those bumps and eventually end up with the MLS Cup, that's absolutely fine. I think that's your prerogative. And some people would definitely take the MLS Cup despite all the bumps in the road. But I think it's important to understand what the bumps in the road were and then make your decision accordingly.
Okay, let's turn the page to a bigger question about 2025 as a whole. Was it a success? Was it a failure? What was it? And before I do, I want to just give some context. This was always going to be the big one for Inter Miami. They were going to get a lot of extra allocation money because they were in the Club World Cup. They sold Diego Gomez. They really had an opportunity to stack this roster with talent. And they were coming off a year where they had built the foundations of how to play together. You were bringing back a lot of players from that team, and you figured out how to have success. Their problem in 2024 was a mistake here or there cost them their trophies. But as a team, they played exceptionally well. They were incredibly tough and good at finding ways to win when the game was not going their way. And then when it went their way, they were able to just blow teams out with multiple different styles and in multiple different ways. And so coming into 2025, you have this baseline of talent. You are getting a ton of allocation money that you will never get again. I'll just tell you. Inter Miami will never have the sort of advantage over other teams that they had in 2025. The schedule lined up to really let you go far in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And then the CONCACAF Champions Cup draw was incredibly friendly to Inter Miami. Inter Miami will probably never have as friendly of a draw in the CONCACAF Champions Cup as they had this year, which would have allowed them to host the final. Like looking at next year's schedule, I think that will be very difficult. And as we've seen, if you have to go to the final in Mexico for a one-off, like that is a much bigger deal than if you get to host it. You also had the Club World Cup extra special transfer window where you could have added pieces that other MLS teams weren't allowed to do. And so my point in saying all of this is this was the big year. And of course, as we found out, this was going to be Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets' final year at Inter Miami. So the talent was at its peak. The cohesion and chemistry among your star players and in this league was at its peak. The best players understood what the MLS was. They understood what CONCACAF was. They understood how to play Liga MX teams. Like, they were ready for this season mentally. This was the opportunity to go as big as you can go with Lionel Messi in the Messi project. And they will not be able to repeat that, the circumstances at the beginning of the season that they had and that they could have achieved. That doesn't mean they won't win more trophies in the future or whatever, but just like where you started this year as opposed to every other MLS club was as big of a gap as you will ever get in this Messi era.
This was the peak of the Messi era. I don't think Inter Miami is ever going to replicate the variables, as you very rightly put them, the same way. And you're never going to get Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets back in your team. So that takes you back like 10 steps already. And Inter Miami had to maximize this. They had to maximize the season for it to be a success.
And so that's my point, is like this was the year to maximize everything. And they brought in Javier Mascherano. We talked about him. He was a rookie coach. And that feels, in retrospect, like it cost them the ability to maximize what this year could be. But like I think if you look back at the end of Messi's time in Inter Miami and you say 2025 was the best year, will you be happy with that? And that is as much a rhetorical question and just one for the audience to think about more than one we have to have the answer to. But like they will never have as green of an opportunity, and the light will never be saying go as strongly as it was at the beginning of this season again. They will never have the advantages they had at the beginning of this season again. And they come away with the MLS Cup, but that's it. And I think some pretty frustrating failures along the way. So what do you think?
I don't think Inter Miami is ever going to be able to win the treble. And I think it was slightly unrealistic this season as well. We went very far in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Yes, the way we exited was poor, but we still put in a decent performance. Yes, I get your point about it being an easy run and all of that, but they got far. Leagues Cup got to the final.
Stop. I want to be clear. When they went to the CONCACAF Champions Cup, they played Kansas City, who's one of the worst teams in the league, and fired their coach a couple weeks later.
But they still have to like beat these teams, right? It's not that easy.
They beat Cavalier, who is the easiest team Inter Miami will ever play. And then they beat an LAFC team that at the time was 9th in the Western Conference. I know we think of LAFC as finishing really well, but that was after they signed Heung-min Son and Denny Bouanga found form. Denny Bouanga was in his worst LAFC form when Inter Miami beat them, and we barely beat them. And then we played Vancouver and kind of got I said a phrase before we started this episode that Saur told me not to say on the pod. So I will just say we did not play particularly well against Vancouver. Like, we got a very easy draw and did not make it past expectations, I don't think.
Yeah, but I'm trying to find the silver lining here. I still think it's...
Well, the silver
if Inter Miami had won... Yeah, if Inter Miami had won one more cup, this would have been a phenomenal season, whether it's the Leagues Cup, CONCACAF Champions Cup, Club World Cup. But I think this would have been a phenomenal season. Yeah, or the Supporter Shield. This would have been
even if you do
peak.
the double and you do the Supporter Shield. But they didn't. and it felt like everything was self-inflicted. Like I don't,
Yeah.
aside from PSG, I never felt like Inter Miami was the worst team talent-wise. It always felt like they were either in poor form, and I think a lot of that was self-caused, or they made bad decisions with personnel or tactical decisions that really cost them.
What I will say was this was not an easy year to win the MLS Cup. So a counter argument to you is yes, we won the MLS Cup, but this was a stacked Eastern Conference. Inter Miami had to really fight for it,
But they didn't have to go through it. They beat FC Cincinnati,
which was
huge,
insanely good. Yeah.
huge. No, no, no. I do not want to downgrade that performance in that event because it was huge. I really wasn't particularly confident going into that game. But the rest of the Eastern Conference took care of itself. We played an NYCFC team without their best goal scorer and whose second best goal scorer started the game on the bench. We beat a Nashville team that was one of the, that wasn't one of the teams we were concerned about. Philadelphia lost, and some of the other best teams lost before we had to play them. So I think that was a normal MLS Cup run. I think if you're going to make a run to the Cup, you have to beat one or two good teams, not four on a regular basis. That felt normal to me.
I will say I think it's an interesting question, but I, with my positive attitude, would say this was a largely successful season, and I would give it an A minus maybe. And yes, winning the CONCACAF Champions Cup or the Leagues Cup or the Supporter Shield would take it to an A plus. But I think I would call this a largely successful season because we talked about it. If Inter Miami wins nothing, what is the one trophy that we could win? And I would say MLS Cup for it to be successful, and we did that. So
just a couple other pieces of context. We did a show at the beginning of the season with a bunch of Inter Miami creators, and we asked them how many trophies Inter Miami should win or will win in 2025. And the median answer was two. A couple people said one. A couple people, I think, said maybe more than two. You said two. I said two. And they only won one. I also said, and I want to be fair because I don't want to be a hypocrite.
we won 4 trophies this season, by the way. We won the MVP, the Golden Boot, the playoff final MVP, and the MLS Cup.
I also don't want to be a hypocrite, and I try not to say things just because I'm emotional. Like I do try and say things that I believe are true, and I did in the last portion of the season say once they lost the Supporter Shield, I said this isn't going to be a successful season, even if they won the MLS Cup, and like I am obviously finding it hard to just say this was a failure because they did win the MLS Cup. And we also said at the time, if we do, we're going to feel great about it at the time. But I think where I land now, having an opportunity to reflect on the whole season, and again, trying to be consistent with how I thought about things throughout the season, is that they passed, but I wouldn't call this a success. I think giving them an A would be
Generous.
not where I would go with this. I would say
So
like
can I give you a different answer? I think in a vacuum, this season was a success, but across the MLS Inter Miami Lionel Messi story, this could have been a lot more, and it may turn out to be a season where we're thinking, what if? And this may have been the season where we could have won it all, but we did not. So in a vacuum, I think this is a success. As a standalone season, this is definitely a success. But in the grand scheme of things, we may look back on the season and wonder, wow, we may have bottled a couple of trophies. Would you be satisfied with that answer?
For me, no.
Okay, interesting.
I actually almost think it's the opposite, where if they can get a CONCACAF Champions Cup in the next 2 years, and then you can kind of look back and say, okay, they won it all over the course of the project, then I think maybe then you feel good about it. But if they never win the CONCACAF Champions Cup and you look back at this season, you say, this was their best chance and they blew it. Like, I think that makes this look even worse in retrospect. So no, I feel like they passed. I wouldn't call this like a smashing success. And I want to be clear. I get that we just won the MLS Cup and everyone is incredibly excited about that and feels great about it. And they looked great at the end. But I also want to be like true to how I felt throughout the season and where my brain was back in February and where my brain was back in April and where my brain was back in May and in August and in November. And all of those things would lead me to say, like, that was a fantastic day that we won the MLS Cup. There's no doubt about it. And I hope everyone remembers it forever.
Best day
But
in
on the
Miami
whole,
history.
yes, best day in Miami history. Maybe the day Lionel Messi said he was coming. I don't know. Maybe the day maybe the day David Beckham and Jorge Mas decided they were going to come to Miami. Maybe, but yes, yes, I'm teasing you. But like I think aside from the day they won the MLS Cup, I never would have said this was a successful season. And so, for me to let the one day or the one game, or even the whole playoff run, which was great, like they were fantastic, and I don't mean to take away from them at all. For me to have that just erase everything that came before that, I think is not really true to who I am. And so I wouldn't say that, no.
That's fair enough. And I think one of the beauties of this platform is that people can have their opinions, they can disagree with us, and they can agree with us. And I know a lot of people will probably disagree with us on this, but I think it's an important conversation to be had. And yeah, discourse is important.
I think also, especially what we talked about with Javier Mascherano, we spent so long kind of expecting to have that conversation, and it would have been an injustice to not have it. Because again,
absolutely.
Like, the last 10% of the season was fantastic and was as much success as any 10-game period in Miami history. But the first 90% of the season, I don't think you would have said that. So,
and I hope next season we see this version of Javier Mascherano, the last 10%. And I hope that Inter Miami is able to achieve that success over a sustained period of time throughout the season. And I would want nothing more. I don't think Javier Mascherano is going anywhere. I don't want him to go anywhere after the run that he's had. And he deserves time, and he deserves to show what he can do next season. Now, having spent an entire season in the MLS, understood his players and understood the league. So hopefully next season is as much of a success, if not more. And we can look back on this conversation and be like, okay, yeah, he learned from his mistakes. And that's all you can ask for.
Yeah. We've already talked about what we want to see from Javier Mascherano and the team in 2026. And so you can go back and watch one of our recent episodes on that. But like I did want to remember the bad times also, just to give us a full accounting of what the 2025 season was, because I think that's fair. And also, listen, the other thing is, in so many American sports, all that matters is winning the championship. And so if you have a bad run here or there, if you win the NBA Finals or if you win the World Series or if you win the Super Bowl, that's all that matters. But this is sport. This sport is different. The sport is not based on just being at the top at the end. There are lots of different competitions, and especially the way that this all works in North America and in the U.S., where these are all happening at different times. Like I get in Europe, the UEFA Champions League final will come a week after your last game, so you could win the double and it can all be great, and it's all sort of confined to the end of the season. But here it's spread out, and like I think that does make you reevaluate how an entire season-long venture that has lots of moments where you're trying to be successful and then down periods where it's not quite as important, you do have to evaluate it slightly differently. And so good to keep the whole season in mind, I think.
Completely agree.
Any final thoughts?
I think this was a conversation that I was not dreading the most, but we knew it would be unpleasant and not the one that fits within the vibe of the entire postseason, which is fair. But as we talk about, we want to stay true to our identity as a podcast, and we want to be rational and evaluate the whole season the way it should be. Again, if this next season, Javier Mascherano shows all the improvements and all the grievances that we've talked about are done away with, I think you and I will be very happy with that. But important conversation to be had. People will disagree with us, but I'm glad we went through this exercise. And hey, at the end of the day, we won the MLS Cup, so that's all that matters.
For today and for this offseason, that's all that matters. So, yes, and that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? And you know what? I'm going to say this a lot during the offseason, but Inter Miami is MLS Cup champions. And that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Okay, guys, thank you so much for checking it out. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will certainly have some more positive conversation. I think this was the
last
only
of
real
the-
negative conversation we're going to have this offseason. Because pretty soon we're going to be signing players, and we're going to get all hyped up and excited about the new signings, and we'll get into preseason, and all that stuff's coming right around the corner. So how to do it, check it off the list, and I think we can move on now and just kind of be excited about what happened and excited about what's going to happen and move forward from there. So, guys, thank you so much for checking us out, and we will see you guys next time. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this, and have a wonderful day.